everyone! If you're enjoying this, don't forget to hit that like button!
The pristine halls of the Galactic Council's weapons ethics committee gleamed with the soft luminescence of advanced technology. Crystalline walls pulsed with data streams while holographic displays showed the elegant curves of energy weapons that had defined galactic warfare for millennia. It was here, in this temple to civilized violence, that humanity's arsenal would be judged and found wanting. Counselor Veltara of the Ethereal Collective stood at the center of the chamber, her translucent form shimmering with righteous indignation. Around her, representatives from the galaxy's most advanced civilizations watched with expressions ranging from disgust to horror as Colonel Marcus Tank Thompson demonstrated human weapons technology. "Observe," Thompson said, his gravelly voice cutting through the chamber's refined atmosphere. "The M16 assault rifle. Magazine capacity, 30 rounds. Effective range, 500 meters. Muzzle velocity, approximately 1,000 meters per second." The holographic display showed the weapon in three-dimensional detail, crude steel and polymer, mechanical components that would have been familiar to engineers from centuries past. To the assembled aliens, it might as well have been a stone. "Axe, this," Veltara intoned, her melodic voice carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions, "is what humans consider military technology. A device that propels small pieces of metal through kinetic force. It is brutally primitive, utterly barbaric, and completely unacceptable for civilized warfare." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Senator Klixanoth of the Crystalline Hegemony leaned forward, his faceted form refracting light into prismatic patterns. "We have transcended such crude methods. Our plasma rifles deliver precise, clean energy that can be calibrated for non-lethal incapacitation or complete molecular disruption. They are elegant, efficient, and entirely civilized." "Exactly," Veltara agreed, her form brightening with approval. "Energy weapons represent the pinnacle of military evolution. They are precise, controllable, and discriminating. They can be modulated to stun rather than kill, to disable rather than destroy. They are the tools of a mature civilization." Thompson's weathered face remained impassive. At 52, he had spent 3 decades in Earth's military, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the frozen battlefields of Europa. He had seen energy weapons in action, watched them fail when electromagnetic interference rendered them useless, witnessed their complex systems break down under the stress of real combat. "With respect, Counselor," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "I'd like to present a different perspective." "You may speak," Veltara replied, though her tone suggested she was granting him a courtesy rather than expecting wisdom. Thompson activated his own holographic display, showing a side-by-side comparison of human kinetic weapons and galactic energy weapons. Energy weapons are indeed elegant. They're also complex, requiring sophisticated power systems, precision targeting computers, and delicate focusing arrays. When any of these systems fails, and they will fail, the weapon becomes useless. "Our technology is extremely reliable," protested Ambassador Zekmar of the Techno-Confederacy. "Failures are statistically negligible, are they?" Thompson pulled up combat statistics from recent conflicts. Energy weapon failure rates average 12% under optimal conditions. Under battlefield stress, electromagnetic interference, environmental extremes, sustained combat, failure rates climb to 43%. "Those are acceptable parameters," Veltara said dismissively. "The precision and control offered by energy weapons far outweigh minor reliability concerns." "Minor?" Thompson's voice hardened. "Tell that to the troops who died because their weapons failed at the critical moment. Tell that to the families who lost loved ones because sophisticated technology couldn't handle a dust storm. The chamber fell silent. Thompson continued, his words carrying the weight of hard-won experience. A kinetic weapon is simple. A bullet doesn't care about your targeting computer or your power supply. It doesn't need calibration or maintenance cycles. You point, you pull the trigger, and it goes where you aimed it. Every time, in any weather, against any target. Barbaric simplicity, Veltara countered. Kinetic weapons are indiscriminate. They cause unnecessary trauma, create devastating wounds, and offer no possibility of non-lethal engagement. They are the tools of primitives who lack the sophistication to develop better alternatives. They're the tools of soldiers who need something that works when everything else fails, Thompson replied. But I understand your position. Energy weapons are certainly more civilized. The word carried a subtle edge that several aliens noticed. Veltara's form flickered with irritation. Indeed they are. Which is why this committee unanimously finds human kinetic weapons to be unacceptable for galactic military applications. They are crude, barbaric, and fundamentally incompatible with civilized warfare. So you're banning them? We are prohibiting their use by any member of the Galactic Defense Alliance. Human forces will be issued standard energy weapons and will be expected to adhere to civilized combat protocols. Thompson nodded slowly. I see. And what happens when we encounter an enemy that doesn't care about your civilized protocols? Our energy weapons are more than adequate to handle any threat. Veltara replied confidently. The galaxy has enjoyed peace for centuries precisely because our advanced technology has made traditional warfare obsolete. Traditional warfare, Thompson repeated. Like the kind that humans specialize in. Precisely. Your species' obsession with primitive violence is exactly why these weapons must be banned. We cannot allow barbarism to contaminate the civilized practice of warfare. The vote was unanimous. Human kinetic weapons were declared illegal for galactic military use, relegated to the same category as biological weapons and indiscriminate area effect devices. Earth's military forces would be equipped with appropriate energy weapons and expected to conform to galactic standards of civilized combat. Thompson gathered his materials, his expression carefully neutral. I hope you're right, Counselor. I hope your energy weapons are sufficient for whatever threats we might face. They will be, Veltara assured him. Violence is not the answer to every problem. Sometimes, Colonel Thompson, the most advanced solution is the most civilized one. As Thompson left the chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between sophisticated and effective. 3 months later, the first reports began filtering in from the Outer Rim territories. Ships were disappearing along the frontier trade routes, their crews missing, their cargo holds stripped bare. The few survivors spoke of nightmarish creatures that seemed to emerge from the void itself, organic monstrosities that absorbed energy attacks and adapted to defensive measures with terrifying speed. In the secure briefing room of the Galactic Defense Command, Admiral Vex Ulan of the Stratocracy studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. His species had evolved beyond individual emotion in favor of collective logical analysis, but even their cold assessment of the situation was deeply troubling. The pattern is consistent, he reported to the assembled Defense Council. Every engagement with these swarmers results in complete mission failure. Our energy weapons appear to have minimal effect. That's impossible, Veltara interjected, her form flickering with agitation. Our plasma rifles can penetrate any known armor system. Our disruptor cannons can destabilize molecular bonds at the quantum level. No organic creature could survive such precise application of force. Nevertheless, Vex Ulan continued, the evidence is clear. The swarmers are not merely surviving our energy attacks, they are adapting to them. Each engagement shows increased resistance to the specific energy frequencies employed. The briefing room fell silent as the implications sank in. The swarmers weren't just tough, they were evolving defenses against galactic weapons in real time. "Show me the combat footage," Veltara demanded. The holographic display came to life, showing scenes from the Battle of Kepler Station. Galactic Defense Forces engaged a swarmer hive ship, their energy weapons creating brilliant displays of plasma and coherent light. The attacks struck their targets with devastating force, burning through armor and organic tissue. For the first few minutes, the weapons were effective. Swarmers died in droves, their biological forms unable to withstand the precise application of energy. But as the battle continued, something changed. The creatures began to shrug off attacks that should have been fatal. Their organic armor adapted, developing new cellular structures that absorbed and dissipated energy. "By the eternal light," whispered Senator Klixanoff, "they're evolving during combat." "Faster than we can adapt our weapons," Dexulan confirmed. "Every energy frequency we deploy becomes less effective within minutes of first use. They're learning to counter our most sophisticated weapon systems." The display showed the battle's conclusion. Galactic Defense Forces in full retreat, their weapons reduced to mere annoyances against an enemy that had evolved beyond their effectiveness. "This is impossible," Veltara repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. "Energy weapons are the pinnacle of military technology. They cannot be simply evolved away." "Apparently they can," Dexulan replied grimly. "The swarmers are biological entities. They adapt to energy attacks at the cellular level, developing new defenses faster than we can develop new weapons. Our sophisticated technology is becoming our weakness." Over the following weeks, the swarmer threat grew exponentially. Each engagement taught them more about galactic weapon systems, made them more resistant to energy attacks. Entire fleets were lost to enemies that laughed off the galaxy's most advanced weaponry. The crisis reached its peak at the Battle of Proxima Centauri, where the largest galactic defense fleet ever assembled faced a swarmer armada. The battle was meant to be a decisive show of force, proof that civilized technology could triumph over organic brutality. It was a massacre. The swarmers had evolved beyond simple energy resistance. They had developed organic systems that not only deflected energy attacks but absorbed them, converting the power into biological fuel. The galaxy's most sophisticated weapons were literally feeding the enemy. "We need alternatives," Dexulan reported to an emergency session of the Defense Council. "Our energy weapons are not just ineffective, they're counterproductive. We're making the enemy stronger with every attack." "What alternatives?" Veltara demanded. "Energy weapons represent the pinnacle of military technology. There is nothing more advanced." "Perhaps," suggested a quiet voice from the back of the chamber, "we need to consider something less advanced." All eyes turned to the speaker, Colonel Thompson, who had been sitting in the observer section throughout the briefing. His presence had been requested for consultation purposes, though it was clear the Defense Council hoped he would remain quietly in the background. "Colonel Thompson," Veltara's tone was icy, "surely you're not suggesting we resort to your barbaric kinetic weapons?" "I'm suggesting," Thompson replied calmly, "that maybe barbarism is exactly what we need right now." The chamber erupted in protests. The very idea of abandoning energy weapons for crude kinetics was anathema to civilizations that had spent millennia perfecting the art of precise violence. "The swarmers adapt to energy attacks," Thompson continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "They evolved defenses against plasma, lasers, particle beams, and every other form of sophisticated warfare. But they're still biological entities. They still have organic bodies that can be damaged by physical force. You're talking about bullets, Veltara said, her form flickering with disgust. Crude projectiles that tear through tissue and cause devastating trauma. I'm talking about weapons that work, Thompson replied. The swarmers can evolve defenses against energy attacks because energy attacks are predictable. They follow known physical laws, operate on specific frequencies, and can be defended against through biological adaptation. He activated his personal data pad, projecting images of various kinetic weapons. But kinetic weapons are different. They operate on principles that biology can't easily adapt to. You can't evolve immunity to having a hole punched through your vital organs. Barbaric, Veltara repeated, but her protest lacked its earlier conviction. Effective, Thompson countered. The swarmers are winning because they've adapted to fight your sophisticated weapons. They haven't adapted to fight our primitive ones. Admiral. Vex Elon leaned forward, his logical mind processing the implications. You're suggesting that less advanced weapons might be more effective against an adaptive biological enemy? I'm suggesting that complexity isn't always better. Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. The debate that followed was heated and prolonged. Centuries of galactic military doctrine were at stake. The very concept of civilized warfare was being challenged by a human who advocated for weapons that most species considered barely above stone clubs, but the facts were undeniable. Energy weapons were failing. The swarmers were adapting faster than galactic technology could evolve. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were being defeated by enemies who turned their sophistication against them. Very well, Veltara finally sighed, her voice heavy with reluctance. We will consider your kinetic weapons, but only as a desperate last resort. With respect, Counselor, Thompson replied, I think we passed desperate about 6 defeated fleets ago. The first field test of human kinetic weapons took place in the Vega system, where a small swarmer scout force was probing galactic defenses. Thompson had insisted on leading the mission personally, commanding a mixed force of human and alien vessels equipped with hastily modified kinetic weapon systems. The sight of the retrofitted ships would have been comical under different circumstances. Elegant alien vessels bristling with crude projectile weapons, their sleek hulls scarred by the mounting brackets for human-designed systems. The aesthetic was jarring, like watching a symphony orchestra perform with kazoos. All units, this is Colonel Thompson, he announced over the fleet communication system. Today we're going to test something new. Those of you from civilized species, prepare to witness barbarism in action. The swarmer scouts approached in their characteristic organic formations, their biomechanical hulls rippling with adaptive tissue. Previous engagements had shown them to be highly resistant to energy weapons, capable of evolving defenses within minutes of first contact. Enemy contacts bearing 27 Mark IV, reported Commander Velsith of the Ethereal Collective, her voice tight with anticipation. Shall we engage with plasma batteries? Negative, Thompson replied. All ships switch to kinetic systems. Target their lead vessels with mass drivers and rail guns. The weapons that opened fire bore no resemblance to the elegant energy systems that had defined galactic warfare. Rail guns accelerated Ferris slugs to significant fractions of light speed. Mass drivers hurled dense projectiles with devastating kinetic force. Autocannons spewed streams of armor-piercing rounds. The effect on the swarmer scouts was immediate and dramatic. Organic armor that had shrugged off plasma bolts was punctured by kinetic projectiles. Biomechanical systems that had adapted to energy attacks were shredded by physical impacts. The swarmers' evolutionary defenses, so effective against sophisticated weapons, were useless against crude kinetic force. By the eternal light, whispered Commander Velsith, they're not adapting. They, Can adapt, Thompson explained. Energy weapons can be defended against through biological changes, new cellular structures, different absorption spectra, modified tissue density. But kinetic weapons create physical damage that can't be evolved away in real time. You can't develop immunity to having a hole punched through your body. The battle was over in minutes. The Swarmer scouts, accustomed to battles of attrition where they gradually adapted to enemy weapons, found themselves facing attacks they couldn't counter. Their organic forms, so effective against energy weapons, were devastatingly vulnerable to kinetic force. Incredible, Admiral Vexulan observed from the fleet's command ship. The efficiency ratio is remarkable. Our energy weapons required sustained bombardment to achieve marginal effectiveness. These kinetic weapons achieve immediate and decisive results. They're also completely uncivilized, Veltara added, her form flickering with conflicted emotions. The damage they cause is ... traumatic, barbaric. There's no elegance, no precision, no possibility of non-lethal engagement. No, Thompson. Agreed. But they work. And sometimes, working is more important than being civilized. The test results were undeniable. Kinetic weapons were devastatingly effective against swarmer biology. The adaptive creatures that had evolved beyond energy attacks were vulnerable to simple physical force. The galaxy's most primitive weapons were proving superior to its most advanced ones. We need to expand the program, Vexulan declared. Retrofit our entire fleet with kinetic systems. Train our forces in their use. Adapt our tactics to accommodate these ... crude but effective weapons. The Cultural Council will never approve. Veltara protested. Using barbaric weapons goes against everything we stand for. We are civilized beings. We don't resort to primitive violence. We do now, Thompson said grimly, because primitive violence is what's going to save us. The process of integrating kinetic weapons into the galactic military was neither quick nor easy. Alien engineers struggled to understand human weapons. Technology, their sophisticated minds baffled by the elegant simplicity of guns and explosives, species that had spent millennia perfecting. Energy weapons found themselves learning to load magazines and calculate ballistic trajectories. The ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form, had to construct crude mechanical bodies just to operate kinetic weapons. This is humiliating, complained Captain Zixtar of the Techno-Confederacy as he struggled with the manual charging mechanism of an assault rifle. My people have developed quantum computers that can calculate the position of every atom in a star system. Now I'm learning to count bullets. Bullets don't run out of battery power, Thompson replied patiently. They don't need quantum processors or targeting computers. They just need someone to point them in the right direction. The training programs were intensive and often frustrating. Aliens accustomed to sophisticated weapon systems found themselves learning what humans considered basic military skills. Loading, aiming, firing, reloading. Actions that human soldiers performed without conscious thought became complex procedures for beings who had never considered the mechanical aspects of warfare. Why do these weapons require so much manual manipulation? Asked Lieutenant Hicks Mara of the Crystalline Hegemony. Our energy weapons are controlled through neural interfaces. We simply think about the target and the weapon responds. Because neural interfaces can be jammed, Thompson explained. Electronic systems can be hacked. Quantum computers can be disrupted. But a trigger is just a mechanical device that releases a spring. No jamming, no hacking, no disruption. Just simple physics. The concept of simple physics was itself revolutionary to many alien species. They had spent so long perfecting complex technologies that they had forgotten the power of basic mechanical systems. Kinetic weapons represented a return to fundamentals. mass, velocity, and momentum applied with devastating effect. There's something almost pure about these weapons, observed Commander Velsith during a training session. They don't depend on exotic energy sources or quantum effects. They simply use the basic laws of physics to achieve their purpose. That's the point, Thompson replied. Complex systems fail in complex ways. Simple systems just work. The true test came when the Swarmers launched their main offensive against the galactic core worlds. Intelligence reports indicated that the adaptive creatures had evolved beyond simple energy resistance. They had developed the ability to absorb and redirect energy attacks, turning the galaxy's most sophisticated weapons against their users. Battle of Sol marked the first major engagement using integrated kinetic weapons. The Galactic Defense Fleet, now equipped with a mix of energy and kinetic systems, faced a Swarmer armada that had evolved to counter every form of sophisticated warfare. All units, this is Admiral Vexulon, came the fleet-wide communication. Today we test the effectiveness of barbaric tactics against adaptive enemies. Colonel Thompson, you have tactical command of kinetic operations. Thompson stood on the bridge of the human dreadnought Indomitable, watching the Swarmer fleet approach. The organic vessels were magnificent in their alien horror, living ships that pulsed with biomechanical systems, their hulls covered in adaptive tissue that shifted and changed in response to perceived threats. They're beautiful, admitted Veltara, her form flickering with reluctant admiration. Elegant, evolved, the perfect fusion of biology and technology. They're about to learn about the perfect fusion of lid and velocity, Thompson replied. The battle began conventionally, with energy weapons engaging the Swarmer fleet at maximum range. The result was predictable. The adaptive creatures absorbed the attacks, their organic systems evolving defenses in real time. Within minutes, the energy weapons were worse than useless, actually feeding power to the enemy. Kinetic weapons commence firing, Thompson ordered. The galaxy's most primitive. Weapons opened fire. Railguns accelerated slugs to relativistic speeds. Mass drivers hurled dense projectiles with devastating force. Autocannons spewed streams of armor-piercing rounds. Chemical explosives detonated against organic hulls. The Swarmer fleet, expecting the usual gradual adaptation process, instead found themselves facing attacks that couldn't be evolved away. Their organic armor, so effective against energy weapons, offered little protection against kinetic force. Their adaptive systems, designed to counter sophisticated attacks, were useless against crude projectiles. They're not adapting, reported Commander Velsith with amazement. The kinetic weapons are maintaining full effectiveness. Of course they are, Thompson replied. You can't evolve immunity to physics. A bullet traveling at 2,000 feet per second doesn't care about your biological adaptations. The battle was brutal and decisive. The Swarmer fleet, accustomed to gradually wearing down sophisticated opponents, found themselves facing enemies who fought with primitive directness. Organic ships that had survived countless energy barrages were shredded by kinetic weapons. Biomechanical systems that had adapted to the galaxy's most advanced technology were destroyed by its most basic. This is horrific, Veltara observed, watching Swarmer vessels disintegrate under kinetic bombardment. The violence is so direct, so brutal. There's no elegance, no sophistication. Just destruction. Just effectiveness, Thompson corrected. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the most primitive one. The victory was complete. The Swarmer fleet, faced with weapons they couldn't adapt to, was destroyed utterly. The threat that had terrorized the galaxy for months was ended by technology that most civilizations considered barely above stone clubs. Remarkable, Admiral. Vexulon observed as the last Swarmer vessel fell silent. The efficiency ratio is unprecedented. Our energy weapons achieved marginal effectiveness through sustained bombardment. These kinetic weapons achieved complete effectiveness through simple application of force. They're also completely uncivilized, Veltara added, but her protest lacked conviction. The damage they cause is traumatic. Barbaric. There's no precision, no control, no possibility of non-lethal engagement. No, Thompson agreed. But they save the galaxy. And sometimes, saving lives is more important than being civilized about it. The aftermath of the Battle of Seoul sent shockwaves through galactic civilization. The victory had been decisive, but it had come at the cost of fundamental assumptions about warfare and progress. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had been saved by its most primitive weapons. We need to completely revise our military doctrine, Admiral Vexulon announced to the Defense Council. Kinetic weapons have proven superior to energy systems against adaptive biological enemies. We must integrate them into our standard arsenals. The Cultural Council will never approve, Veltara protested, though her objection sounded routine rather than heartfelt. Using barbaric weapons goes against everything we represent. We are civilized beings. We don't resort to primitive violence. We do now, Thompson said quietly, because primitive violence is what saved us. The integration of kinetic weapons into galactic military doctrine was neither quick nor easy. Entire civilizations had to confront the uncomfortable reality that their most sophisticated technologies had been less effective than humanity's barbaric alternatives. It's humiliating, complained Senator Klixanoff of the crystalline hegemony. My people have developed quantum computers that can simulate entire universes. Now we're learning to count bullets and measure powder charges. Bullets don't need quantum computers, Thompson replied patiently. They just need someone to point them at the target. The philosophical implications were even more challenging than the practical ones. Species that had built their entire cultural identity around the concept of advanced technology were forced to acknowledge that advancement sometimes meant simplification. We've spent millennia perfecting energy weapons, observed Commander Velsith during a strategy session. We believe that complexity was a sign of sophistication, that the most advanced solution was always the best solution. Sometimes it is, Thompson agreed. But sometimes the most advanced solution is recognizing when simple is better. The training programs expanded rapidly. Alien officers who had never considered the mechanical aspects of warfare found themselves learning human military doctrine. The concepts were foreign to species that had automated most aspects of combat. Why? Do these weapons require so much manual intervention? Asked Captain Zixtar of the Techno Confederacy. Our energy weapons are controlled through neural interfaces. We simply think about the target and the weapon responds. Because thinking can be disrupted, Thompson explained. Neural interfaces can be jammed. Electronic systems can be hacked. But a trigger is just a mechanical device. No jamming, no hacking, no disruption. Just simple physics. The concept of simple physics was revolutionary to many alien species. They had spent so long perfecting complex technologies that they had forgotten the power of basic mechanical principles. Kinetic weapons represented a return to fundamentals. Mass, velocity, and momentum applied with devastating effect. There's something almost pure about these weapons, observed Lieutenant Hixmara of the crystalline hegemony during a training exercise. They don't depend on exotic energy sources or quantum effects. They simply use the basic laws of physics to achieve their purpose. That's the point, Thompson replied. Complex systems fail in complex ways. Simple systems just work. The cultural impact was profound. Civilizations that had prided themselves on transcending primitive violence were forced to acknowledge that primitiveness had its place. The galaxy's most advanced societies were learning from its most basic. We were wrong, Veltara finally admitted during a private conversation with Thompson. We believed that advancement meant leaving behind crude methods. We thought that sophistication was inherently superior to simplicity. Sometimes it is, Thompson replied. But sometimes the most sophisticated thing you can do is recognize when crude methods are more effective. The swarmers taught us that. Veltara continued. They adapted to our sophistication. They evolved beyond our advancement. But they couldn't adapt to your barbarism. They couldn't adapt to physics, Thompson corrected. Energy weapons can be defended against through biological changes. Kinetic weapons create physical damage that can't be evolved away in real time. The lessons extended beyond military applications. Scientists began reconsidering their approach to complex problems, asking whether sophisticated solutions were always better than simple ones. Engineers started designing systems that prioritized reliability over elegance. Philosophers debated whether advancement sometimes meant returning to basics. The humans have given us something we didn't know we had lost, observed Admiral Vexulon during a strategy briefing. They've reminded us that effectiveness is more important than elegance. That working solutions are better than sophisticated failures. They've also shown us that barbarism and civilization aren't mutually exclusive, Veltara added. One can use primitive methods for civilized purposes. One can employ crude tools to achieve sophisticated goals. The integration process continued. For months, alien officers learned to maintain kinetic weapons. Human engineers helped design hybrid systems that combined energy and kinetic elements. And military doctrine was rewritten to accommodate the new reality. It's remarkable, observed Commander Velsith during a joint training exercise. These weapons are so direct, so uncompromising. They don't allow for elaborate tactics or sophisticated countermeasures. They just work. That's the beauty of them, Thompson replied. No complex targeting systems to fail. No exotic energy sources to deplete. No quantum computers to malfunction. Just point and shoot. The concept of point and shoot was itself revolutionary to species that had automated most aspects of combat. They had developed weapons that required minimal input from their operators, systems that could function almost independently of human or alien control. Why do these weapons require so much direct involvement from the operator? Asked Captain Zixtar during a training session. Our energy weapons can be programmed to engage targets automatically. They don't need constant manual control. Because automation can be hacked, Thompson explained. Automatic systems can be reprogrammed. But a human or alien making direct decisions can't be overridden by enemy interference. The philosophical implications were staggering. Civilizations that had spent millennia removing the individual from warfare were learning that individual involvement was sometimes crucial. The galaxy's most advanced societies were discovering the value of personal responsibility in combat. We've become too dependent on our technology, Veltara admitted during a strategic planning session. We've developed systems that think for us, weapons that fight for us, tactics that execute themselves. We've removed the individual from the equation. And the swarmers exploited that, Thompson replied. They adapted to your automated systems. They evolved beyond your programmed responses. But they couldn't adapt to human unpredictability. Because humans are still involved in their own warfare, Veltara realized. You haven't automated the individual out of combat. You still make personal decisions, take personal risks, accept personal responsibility. We still pull our own triggers, Thompson agreed, and sometimes that makes all the difference. The final validation came during the Battle of Kepler Prime, where a massive swarmer armada, apparently the last major force of the adaptive creatures, launched a desperate assault on the galactic core worlds. The enemy had evolved beyond their earlier forms, developing new adaptations based on their encounters with kinetic weapons. "They're learning," reported Admiral Vex Ulan from the fleet command ship. "The swarmers have developed thicker armor, redundant biological systems. IMPROVED damage control. They're adapting to kinetic weapons." "But slowly," Thompson observed, studying the tactical displays. Energy weapons allowed them to adapt in real time. Kinetic weapons force them to evolve between engagements. That gives us an advantage. The battle was fierce and prolonged. The swarmers had indeed developed better defenses against kinetic weapons, but their adaptations were biological rather than technological. They could grow thicker armor, but they couldn't change the fundamental physics of kinetic impact. "They're tougher," reported Commander Velsith as her squadron engaged a cluster of swarmer vessels. "But they're still vulnerable to sustained kinetic bombardment." "Then we sustain it," Thompson replied. "All units, concentrate fire. These things can adapt to energy weapons in minutes. They need generations to adapt to kinetic weapons." The engagement demonstrated the fundamental difference between the two weapon types. Energy weapons could be countered through rapid biological adaptation, new cellular structures, different absorption spectra, modified tissue density. But kinetic weapons created physical damage that couldn't be evolved away quickly. "They're falling back," observed Veltara with amazement. "The swarmers are actually retreating because they can't adapt fast enough," Thompson explained. "Energy weapons gave them time to evolve defenses. Kinetic weapons kill them before they can adapt. The victory was complete, but it came with a cost." The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had been forced to acknowledge that their sophisticated technologies were sometimes inferior to primitive alternatives. The cultural implications were profound and lasting. "We need to revise our understanding of progress," Admiral Vex Ulan announced to the Defense Council. "Advancement isn't always about increasing complexity. Sometimes it's about recognizing when simple solutions are better. The humans have taught us that barbarism and civilization aren't mutually exclusive," Veltara added. "One can use primitive methods for civilized purposes. One can employ crude tools to achieve sophisticated goals." The integration of kinetic weapons into galactic military doctrine was declared complete, but the cultural transformation was just beginning. Species that had spent millennia perfecting energy weapons were learning to appreciate the elegant simplicity of kinetic systems. "It's humbling," admitted Senator Klixanoth of the Crystalline Hegemony. "We believe that our advanced technology represented the pinnacle of military evolution. We were wrong." "You weren't wrong," Thompson replied. "You were incomplete. Energy weapons have their place, but so do kinetic weapons. The trick is knowing when to use which." The new military doctrine emphasized diversity over sophistication. Fleets were equipped with both energy and kinetic systems, allowing commanders to choose the most effective weapon for each situation. The concept of appropriate technology replaced the old obsession with advanced technology. "We've learned to think like engineers rather than scientists," observed Commander Velsith during a strategy session. "Engineers ask what works. Scientists ask what's elegant. Sometimes those are the same thing, sometimes they're not. And sometimes," Thompson added, "the most elegant solution is the one that works when everything else fails." The training programs continued, but their focus had shifted. Instead of simply learning to use kinetic weapons, alien officers were learning to think like human soldiers, to prioritize effectiveness over elegance, to choose simple solutions over sophisticated ones, to remember that the best weapon was the one that worked when needed. "You've changed how we think about warfare," Veltara told Thompson during a private meeting. You've shown us that advancement isn't always about moving forward. Sometimes it's about remembering what worked in the past. Sometimes old solutions are the best solutions, Thompson agreed, especially when new problems require old answers. The philosophical implications extended far beyond military applications. Scientists began questioning whether sophisticated solutions were always better than simple ones. Engineers started designing systems that prioritized reliability over complexity. Philosophers debated whether progress sometimes meant returning to basics. The humans have given us a new perspective on civilization itself, observed Admiral Vexulon during a cultural exchange program. They've shown us that being civilized doesn't mean abandoning effective methods. It means using those methods responsibly. They've also shown us that barbarism isn't about the weapons you use, Veltara added. It's about how you use them. Kinetic weapons can be barbaric in the wrong hands. But in the right hands, they can be the most civilized choice available. The transformation was complete. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned to appreciate the value of primitive technology. But the true test of their new understanding came when they faced their next major threat. The Voidborn emerged from the space between galaxies, entities of pure energy that existed in dimensions beyond normal comprehension. They were the antithesis of the swarmers, beings of sophisticated energy manipulation who wielded the fundamental forces of the universe as weapons. They're immune to kinetic weapons, reported Admiral Vexulon grimly as the first reports came in from the frontier. Physical projectiles pass through them without effect. They exist primarily as energy constructs. So we're back to energy weapons? Asked Commander Velsith. Not exactly, Thompson replied, studying the intelligence reports. The Voidborn can manipulate energy. They can redirect our plasma bolts, absorb our particle beams, even turn our own weapons against us. But they're still bound by the laws of physics. What do you mean? Energy beings still need to follow conservation laws. They can't create energy from nothing. They can't violate thermodynamics. And they can't exist in a vacuum of their own. Making. Thompson activated a holographic display showing various human weapon systems, not the kinetic weapons that had proven so effective against the swarmers, but different tools altogether. Nuclear weapons, he explained. Not for their kinetic effect, but for their energy disruption. A nuclear detonation creates a massive electromagnetic pulse that can disrupt energy-based entities. Chemical weapons that target the quantum fields that energy beings use to maintain cohesion. Biological weapons that introduce chaos into ordered energy systems. You're talking about weapons of mass destruction, Veltara protested. We banned those weapons for good reason. We banned them because they're indiscriminate, Thompson agreed. But the Voidborn are an extinction-level threat. Sometimes you have to use terrible weapons to prevent even more terrible outcomes. The debate that followed was intense and agonizing. The galaxy's civilized species were being asked to use weapons. They had banned for millennia not just primitive kinetic weapons, but weapons of mass destruction that could devastate entire worlds. There has to be another way, Veltara insisted. We can't resort to nuclear weapons. We can't use chemical or biological warfare. We're civilized beings. We're beings who want to survive, Thompson replied. And sometimes survival requires using tools that make us uncomfortable. The first engagement with the Voidborn was a disaster. Traditional energy weapons were not just ineffective, they were counterproductive. The Voidborn absorbed the attacks, grew stronger, and turned. The absorbed energy against the galactic fleets. Kinetic weapons passed through them harmlessly, unable to affect beings that existed primarily as energy constructs. We need a new approach, Admiral Vexulon admitted after the devastating defeat at Rigel. Our conventional weapons are useless. against these entities. Then we use unconventional weapons, Thompson replied. We use the tools that civilized beings don't like to think about. The preparation for Operation Cleansing Fire was unlike anything in galactic history. Nuclear weapons were constructed for the first time in millennia. Chemical compounds were synthesized to disrupt quantum fields. Biological agents were engineered to introduce chaos into ordered energy systems. This feels wrong, Veltara observed as she watched the preparations. We're preparing to use weapons that we've spent centuries trying to eliminate. Sometimes wrong is necessary, Thompson replied. Sometimes the civilized choice is to use uncivilized methods. The Battle of Alpha Centauri was the culmination of humanity's unconventional approach to warfare. The Void-born fleet, expecting to face conventional energy weapons, instead encountered attacks that targeted their fundamental nature. Nuclear weapons created electromagnetic pulses that disrupted their energy matrices. Chemical agents introduced quantum chaos into their ordered systems. Biological weapons, specifically engineered viruses that attacked energy-based life forms, infected their structures with entropy and disorder. It's working, reported Commander Velsith with amazement. The Voidborn are actually retreating. Because we're not fighting them with sophistication, Thompson explained. We're fighting them with chaos. We're using weapons that introduce disorder into their ordered systems. The victory was complete but troubling. The galaxy had been saved by weapons that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Nuclear weapons had been used not for their destructive force, but for their disruptive effect. Chemical and biological weapons had been deployed not against organic life, but against energy-based entities. We used weapons of mass destruction to save the galaxy, Veltara observed during the post-battle analysis. Weapons that we banned because they were too terrible to use. And they were exactly what we needed, Thompson replied. Because sometimes the most terrible weapons are the only ones that work. The cultural implications were staggering. The galaxy's civilized species had been forced to confront the reality that their moral restrictions sometimes conflicted with their survival needs. The comfortable certainties of civilized warfare had been shattered by the harsh realities of existential threats. We need to revise our understanding of appropriate force, Admiral Thaksulan announced to the Defense Council. There are threats that require responses that make us uncomfortable. The question is whether we're willing to be uncomfortable to survive. The humans have taught us that survival sometimes requires difficult choices, Veltara added. They've shown us that the most civilized action is sometimes the one that preserves civilization, regardless of how uncivilized it might appear. The integration of unconventional weapons into galactic military doctrine was even more controversial than the adoption of kinetic weapons. Species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of civilized warfare were being asked to prepare for uncivilized conflicts. It's necessary, Thompson argued during a strategic planning session. We've learned that different threats require different responses. Energy beings require energy disruption. Adaptive biologicals require non-adaptive physics. Future threats will require future solutions. But at what cost? Asked Senator Kliksanoff. If we prepare for every possible threat, we risk becoming the very thing we're trying to defend against. No, Thompson replied. We risk becoming effective. There's a difference. The philosophical debate continued for months. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were grappling with questions that had no easy answers. How far should civilized beings go to preserve their civilization? What weapons were acceptable when facing extinction? Where was the line between necessary force and unnecessary brutality? The humans have given us a new perspective on moral complexity, observed Commander Velsith during a cultural exchange program. They've shown us that ethical choices aren't always between good and evil. Sometimes they're between survival and extinction. They've also shown us that being civilized doesn't mean being weak, Veltara added. It means being strong enough to make hard choices when necessary. The transformation of galactic military doctrine was complete. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned to appreciate not just primitive weapons, but all weapons as tools to be used when appropriate. The concept of appropriate response replaced the old obsession with civilized methods. We've learned to think like soldiers rather than philosophers, observed Admiral Vexilon during a final strategic review. Philosophers ask what's right. Soldiers ask what works. Sometimes those are the same thing. Sometimes they're not. And sometimes, Thompson added, the most philosophical thing you can do is recognize that survival comes first, philosophy second. The final ceremony took place on Earth, where representatives from across the galaxy gathered to witness the signing of the Comprehensive Defense Doctrine, a document that formally recognized the strategic value of all weapons, from the most primitive to the most sophisticated. Today, Thompson addressed the assembly, we celebrate not just the end of multiple threats, but the beginning of a new understanding. For too long, we believed that civilization meant abandoning effective methods. We thought that being advanced meant using only advanced weapons. He paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces that had learned to think like human soldiers. We were wrong. Civilization isn't about the weapons you refuse to use. It's about using the right weapon at the right time for the right reasons. Advanced isn't about complexity. It's about effectiveness. The applause was thunderous, but Thompson wasn't finished. The swarmers taught us that sophisticated weapons can be countered by biological adaptation. The Voidborn taught us that conventional weapons can be useless against unconventional threats. But we learned that for every threat, there's an appropriate response. The trick is being willing to use it. As the ceremony concluded and the representatives returned to their worlds, Thompson stood on the observation deck of the treaty station, looking out at the stars. The galaxy was at peace, but more importantly, it was prepared for whatever threats might emerge. Colonel, Veltara joined him at the viewport. What happens when we face the next threat? What if it's something that requires even more uncomfortable ... solutions? Thompson smiled grimly. Then we'll use whatever works. Because that's what soldiers do. We don't choose the comfortable solution. We choose the effective one. Even if it makes us uncomfortable. Especially if it makes us uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable means we're still civilized enough to question our choices. But being effective means we're still alive to make them. As the stars wheeled overhead, Thompson felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned the most important lesson of all, that being civilized didn't mean being weak. It meant being strong enough to use whatever tools were necessary to protect civilization itself. The aliens had called human weapons barbaric. They had learned, in the end, that barbarism was just another word for effectiveness. And sometimes, effectiveness was the most civilized choice of all. You know what I think? Thompson said to Veltara as they watched the stars. I think the galaxy finally understands the difference between being sophisticated and being effective. And the difference is, sophisticated weapons impress your enemies. Effective weapons defeat them. Veltara's form flickered with what might have been amusement. And sometimes the most effective weapons are the ones that seem least sophisticated. Sometimes, Thompson agreed. But the real lesson is that every weapon has its place. Energy weapons for precision, kinetic weapons for reliability, nuclear weapons for disruption, chemical weapons for chaos, biological weapons for adaptation. The trick is knowing when to use which. The humans have given us the most valuable gift of all, Veltara observed. They've taught us to think like warriors rather than just soldiers. What's the difference? Soldiers follow doctrine. Warriors adapt to circumstances. Soldiers use appropriate weapons. Warriors use effective weapons. Thompson nodded. And sometimes, the most effective weapon is the one that everyone else thinks is barbaric. As the final delegates departed and the station returned to normal operations, Thompson remained at the viewport, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The galaxy had been saved not once but twice by weapons that civilized beings had dismissed as primitive or barbaric. But the real victory wasn't in the weapons themselves. It was in the willingness to use them. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned that survival sometimes required uncomfortable choices, that effectiveness was more important than elegance, and that the most civilized action was sometimes the one that preserved civilization itself. The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the struggles of the beings who dwelt among them. But those beings had learned something important, that in a universe full of threats, the most dangerous civilizations were not the ones with the most sophisticated weapons, but the ones willing to use whatever weapons were necessary to survive. And sometimes, the most necessary weapons were the ones that everyone else called barbaric. The transformation of galactic military doctrine was complete, but its implications extended far beyond warfare. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned to question their assumptions about progress, sophistication, and civilization itself. We spent millennia believing that advancement meant moving beyond crude methods, Veltura observed during a cultural symposium held 1 year after the final battle. We thought that being civilized meant abandoning primitive solutions. But primitive solutions are often the most effective ones, Thompson replied. The universe doesn't care about our aesthetic preferences. It only cares about what works. The philosophical implications were profound. Universities across the galaxy began teaching courses on practical philosophy, the art of choosing effective solutions over elegant ones. Engineering schools emphasized reliability over sophistication. Military academies trained officers to think like human soldiers rather than alien strategists. The humans have given us a new way of thinking about problems, observed Dr. Kexnara of the Galactic Institute of Technology. They've shown us that the best solution isn't always the most complex one. Sometimes the best solution is the one that works when everything else fails. The cultural exchange programs that followed were unprecedented in their scope and impact. Human military advisors worked with alien engineers to develop hybrid systems that combined sophisticated technology with primitive reliability. Alien scientists studied human problem-solving methods, learning to approach challenges with a soldier's mentality rather than a scholar's theoretical framework. It's remarkable, noted Ambassador Zilmuth of the Cultural Exchange Commission. Human approaches to problem-solving are so direct. They don't get distracted by theoretical possibilities. They focus on practical necessities. Because we've learned that fancy doesn't always mean effective, Thompson explained during a joint conference. We've learned that the most advanced solution is often the one that works under the worst conditions. The technological developments that emerged from this collaboration were revolutionary. Weapon systems that combined energy precision with kinetic reliability. Starships that used both sophisticated navigation computers and primitive backup systems. Communication networks that employed quantum encryption alongside simple mechanical redundancies. We're not abandoning sophistication, clarified Chief Engineer Valtox of the Galactic Defense Force. We're augmenting it with primitiveness. We're creating systems that are both advanced and reliable. The military implications were equally significant. The Galactic Defense Force was restructured to include both sophisticated and primitive capabilities. Elite units were trained in both energy and kinetic warfare. Command structures were designed to function with both automated systems and manual controls. The new doctrine is simple, explained Admiral Dexulon during a strategic briefing. Use the right tool for the job. If sophisticated tools work, use them. If primitive tools work better, use them instead. Effectiveness trumps elegance every time. The psychological impact on galactic civilization was perhaps the most profound change of all. Species that had spent millennia perfecting sophisticated technologies were learning to appreciate the value of crude solutions. The concept of appropriate technology replaced the old obsession with advanced technology. We've learned humility, observed Veltara during a philosophical discussion. We've learned that being more advanced doesn't make us better. It just makes us different, and sometimes different isn't better. The humans have taught us that wisdom isn't about knowing. The most sophisticated solution, added Senator Klixonoth, it's about knowing which solution will work. The educational reforms that followed were comprehensive. Schools across the galaxy began teaching practical problem solving alongside theoretical analysis. Students learned to evaluate solutions based on effectiveness rather than sophistication. The concept of elegant simplicity became a core principle of galactic education. We're not making our citizens less intelligent, explained Education Minister Hax Myra of the Techno Confederacy. We're making them more practical. We're teaching them to think like engineers rather than just scientists. The economic implications were equally significant. Industries that had focused on producing the most sophisticated technologies possible began developing products that prioritized reliability over complexity. The market for primitive solutions, kinetic weapons, mechanical systems, non-electronic tools, exploded as civilized beings learned to appreciate their value. It's ironic, observed market analyst Velkrim of the Galactic Trade Commission. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy are now competing to produce the most primitive technologies. We've come full circle. The research and development programs that emerged from this new understanding were unprecedented in their scope. Scientists who had spent careers perfecting energy weapons began studying kinetic systems. Engineers who had designed quantum computers started developing mechanical calculators. Philosophers who had explored the nature of consciousness began examining the philosophy of practical action. We're not abandoning our advanced knowledge, clarified Research Director Kex Vora of the Galactic Science Institute. We're applying it to primitive problems. We're using our sophisticated understanding to make simple solutions more effective. The results were remarkable. Kinetic weapons that used advanced materials science to achieve unprecedented effectiveness. Mechanical systems that incorporated quantum engineering to achieve perfect reliability. Chemical compounds that used molecular design to achieve specific effects. We're creating a new category of technology, observed Thompson during a scientific conference. Advanced primitive systems. Sophisticated simplicity. Elegant brutality. The military applications were immediate and dramatic. The new generation of barbaric weapons was far more effective than their predecessors. Kinetic weapons that used advanced materials and precision engineering. Chemical weapons that employed molecular design and quantum chemistry. Biological weapons that incorporated genetic engineering and nanotechnology. These weapons are primitive in concept but advanced in execution, explained weapons designer Veltara during a demonstration. They use the simplest possible approach to achieve the desired effect, but they use the most sophisticated possible methods to implement that approach. The strategic implications were profound. The galaxy's military forces were no longer limited to either sophisticated or primitive approaches. They could use both, choosing the most effective method for each situation. The concept of appropriate response became the cornerstone of galactic military doctrine. "We have the best of both worlds," observed Admiral Vexilon during a strategy session. "We can use sophisticated weapons when sophistication is appropriate. We can use primitive weapons when primitiveness is more effective. We're not limited by our prejudices anymore." The cultural implications were equally significant. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned to question their assumptions about progress and sophistication. The comfortable certainties of advanced civilization had been replaced by the practical realities of effective action. "The humans have taught us that civilization isn't about the tools you use," observed Veltara during a cultural analysis. "It's about how you use them. A primitive tool used wisely is more civilized than a sophisticated tool used foolishly." "They've also taught us that wisdom isn't about knowing the most advanced solution," added Thompson. "It's about knowing which solution will work when you need it to work." The final assessment came from an unexpected source. The Eternal Observers, ancient beings who had watched galactic civilization develop for millions of years, emerged from their self-imposed isolation to offer their perspective on the transformation. "We have observed the rise and fall of countless civilizations," announced their representative, a being of pure energy who existed across multiple dimensions. "We have seen species achieve great sophistication only to be defeated by simple problems. We have watched advanced civilizations collapse because they forgot the value of primitive solutions." The Eternal Observer's form shimmered with what might have been approval. "The current galactic civilization has achieved something remarkable. It has learned to balance sophistication with simplicity. It has remembered that effectiveness is more important than elegance. It has discovered that the most advanced solution is often the most appropriate one." "And the humans?" asked Veltara. "Humans have given your civilization something precious," the Eternal Observer replied. "They have given you the wisdom to know when to be sophisticated and when to be simple. They have taught you that true advancement lies not in abandoning primitive methods, but in knowing when to use them." The ceremony that followed was unlike any in galactic history. Representatives from every major civilization gathered to witness the formal adoption of the Comprehensive Technology Doctrine, a document that recognized the equal value of sophisticated and primitive solutions. "Today," Thompson addressed the assembly, "we celebrate not just the end of technological prejudice, but the beginning of practical wisdom. We have learned that advancement isn't about using the most sophisticated tools available. It's about using the most appropriate tools for the job." As the ceremony concluded and the representatives returned to their worlds, Thompson stood once again on the observation deck of the treaty station. The galaxy was at peace, but more importantly, it was prepared for whatever challenges might emerge. "Colonel," Veltara joined him at the viewport, "what do you think will happen when we face our next great challenge?" Thompson smiled. "We'll use whatever works. Sophisticated solutions if they're appropriate. Primitive solutions if they're more effective. The right tool for the job, regardless of how advanced or barbaric it might seem. And if neither sophisticated nor primitive solutions work, then we'll invent new solutions. That's what humans do. That's what civilized beings do. We adapt. We overcome. We survive." As the stars wheeled overhead, Thompson felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned the most important lesson of all, that true wisdom lay not in choosing between sophisticated and primitive solutions, but in knowing when to use each. The aliens had called human weapons barbaric. They had learned in the end that barbarism was just another word for effectiveness. And sometimes the most civilized choice was the most barbaric one. But the real victory wasn't in the weapons themselves. It was in the wisdom to use them appropriately. The galaxy had learned that survival required not just sophisticated thinking, but practical action. And sometimes, the most practical action was the one that everyone else called barbaric. The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the struggles of the beings who dwelt among them. But those beings had learned something important, that in a universe full of challenges, the most successful civilizations were not the ones with the most sophisticated solutions, but the ones willing to use whatever solutions were necessary to survive and thrive. And sometimes, the most necessary solutions were the ones that everyone else called barbaric.